You've probably heard stories about World War II, right? But what if I told you the real shock wasn't the battles themselves, but what the Germans realized about America while fighting them? Yeah, it started with a bunch of high-ranking German generals who thought Americans were just soft shopkeepers. But that idea? It was dead wrong. They looked at us from across the ocean and saw a nation too obsessed with comfort, too individualistic to be real soldiers. But then the war kicked off, and they saw something completely different on the battlefield. And therefore, the story of how their whole perception shattered is one you need to know. At first, the Germans watched from their intelligence offices, scratching their heads over reports from America. But these weren't ordinary reports. They talked about Liberty ships rolling off assembly lines faster than physics should allow. And therefore, these ships weren't built like castles, one brick at a time. No, they were like giant puzzles snapped together so fast, you wouldn't believe it. One ship, the SS Robert E. Peary, was built from keel to launch in just under 5 days. That was unheard of anywhere else. Then there were the bombers, the B-24 Liberators, coming out in numbers bigger than any single year's German production. But it didn't stop there. The Sherman tanks, rolling out by the tens of thousands, weren't masterpieces, but tough, replaceable tools that made the Germans' finely tuned machines look fragile. And therefore, the American war machine wasn't just big, it was unstoppable. In total, America produced over 300,000 aircraft, more than 100,000 tanks and armored vehicles, and nearly 125,000 ships during the war. But these weren't just numbers. They were mountains of machines, weapons, and supplies flooding the battlefields. Germany, powerhouse of Europe on paper, simply couldn't keep up, and therefore the Germans started to feel the pressure without even facing the Americans directly. But the first time the Germans really thought they had them was at Kasserine Pass. The Americans looked green, untested, and frankly they got crushed. Therefore, it seemed their whole idea was right. But then, that was just the beginning of a much bigger lesson. Because what the Germans didn't get was how fast we learned. Every mistake was a lesson, every defeat just a step forward. We upgraded tactics, changed commanders, refitted our equipment, and kept pushing. But then came D-Day, and therefore their minds blew. They saw a fleet so massive it clogged the English Channel. Over 5,000 ships, thousands of tanks, and nearly 150,000 troops invading France in a single operation. They saw a war philosophy they had never met before, one that threw everything it had at a problem until it broke it. But the Germans, they were used to precision, efficiency, saving every bullet. But the Americans, they were built for abundance, waste even, and therefore that endless supply meant American units just never stopped moving. When an American infantry platoon ran into a single machine gun nest, they didn't waste lives trying to outflank it. No, the lieutenant called in his mortars. When that failed, he called in artillery. When that wasn't enough, he called in air support and naval gunfire. And therefore, layers of firepower turned the obstacle to rubble, reduced the enemy's position to ashes, and kept the advance rolling forward. The biggest surprise: the way we moved. The Germans still relied on horses and old trucks. But the Americans, every soldier, every piece of gear was motorized. Therefore, when Patton's men were ordered to race 90 miles to relieve besieged allies in Bastogne during the Battle of the Bulge, they just jumped in their trucks and went. But the Germans had to march on foot, and therefore they arrived tired, beaten before the fight even started. And it wasn't just the vehicles on the ground. The American logistical system was a marvel, known as the Red Ball Express. It was thousands of trucks running day and night, moving tons of fuel, ammunition, and food to the front lines no matter what. The Germans couldn't believe what they saw, mountains of supplies that defied every principle of military efficiency they cherished. And therefore, American forces never stopped. They fought at full intensity, every day, every hour. But the clincher was the Battle of the Bulge, a last desperate gamble by Hitler. The Germans thought they could break the Americans, but the American spirit held strong. Surrounded at Bastogne, outnumbered and freezing, the Americans refused to give in. When the Germans told them to surrender, the reply: nuts. And therefore, the tide turned. Then Patton pulled off a move that defied logic, a 90-degree turn of his entire Third Army, rushing north to smash the German flank and relieve Bastogne. And therefore, the end was truly near for Germany. The last thing the Germans understood before it was too late was this: America wasn't just fighting with soldiers. America was a machine, an industrial, relentless, unstoppable machine. And therefore, no matter how brilliant the German tactics, no matter the courage or skill, they were ground down by sheer abundance. Every loss America suffered on the battlefield was replaced in a matter of weeks. Tanks, planes, ammunition, and men all flowed from a vast industrial pipeline stretching from Detroit to Pittsburgh, from Los Angeles to the Great Lakes. And therefore, what mattered most wasn't a single battle or even a campaign. It was the continuous flow of production and supply. So here's what I want you to take away from this story. Greatness isn't always about precision or tradition. Sometimes it's about having the will, the resources, and the machine to keep going when everything else fades away. And therefore, America wasn't just built different, it was built to win. That's the story. And if you ever doubt the power behind the scenes, just remember, wars aren't just fought on battlefields. They're fought in factories, on highways, and inside every hard-working hand that keeps the machine moving.